New revelations around Joe Biden's mishandling of classified documents raise serious new concerns about Hunter Biden and his ties to the Chinese Communist Party. It's the scandal of the century, or at least it should be. On today's show, I'll go over all the new information about the Bidens and the CCP and discuss why the Democrats always seem to come down on the side of China's communist government. In addition, in today's deep dive segment, I'll take a close look at the Biden classified document debacle, focusing on the treatment of classified documents throughout U.S. history. All that, plus behind the headlines on today's episode of Founding Principles.
A battle for the fate of America rages. The radical left seeks to destroy the very foundations of our republic. God, the family, and the Constitution are under attack. Amidst the chaos, Doug Wardlow speaks truth and points the way back to freedom. It is time to go on offense. This is Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow.
Hello, and welcome to Founding Principles. As always, I am your host, Doug Wardlow. Here is a critical question that we all need to consider. Why do so many Democrats choose to look the other way when it comes to the many evils of China's ruling Chinese Communist Party? And why do so many Democrats downplay the threat that the CCP poses to America? The real answers to these questions have huge implications for America's national security, and they also expose the Democrats' flawed, fundamentally anti-American worldview. I'll get to those answers in a few moments, and you will be outraged by what you learn. You'll also be outraged to learn about newly discovered, shocking links between Hunter Biden and the Chinese Communist Party. Before we get to that, let's take a look at some of the evils of the CCP and the threat that the CCP poses to the United States, and in particular, what Republicans are doing to expose those evils and combat that threat. Now, I've talked at length on this show about the evils of the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, I did a 5-part series exposing some of the worst of the CCP's crimes against humanity, and I've also discussed at length the threat that the CCP presents to the free people of Taiwan. Now, if you haven't watched or listened to those episodes, I encourage you to do so. They are linked down in the episode description. Fortunately, conservative Republicans in the House are focused on the threat of the CCP like a laser. And because so many Americans are waking up to the evils of the CCP, the House Republicans' focus on the issue is forcing a good number of Democrats to move in the right direction as well. Indeed, the establishment of a new select committee focused on the CCP marks a major victory for House Republicans and a huge win for America. The new committee is called the House Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. And every single House Republican present backed the formation of the committee. And while the committee does have some bipartisan support, all of the opposition to the committee came from the Democrat Party. 65 Democrats voted against establishing it. Now, this committee should have been formed a long, long time ago. Even 25 years ago, it wasn't hard to see that the murderous CCP regime represented a growing threat to the United States and to the free world. Like many others, I certainly saw that growing threat, and that's why, some 25 years ago, I chose to study China, Mandarin Chinese, and the CCP. As the ancient Chinese warrior and philosopher Sun Tzu said in his famous work, The Art of War, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And so I took it upon myself to learn everything I could about China, including the Chinese language, and I studied the many evils of the Chinese Communist Party. In the year 2000, I spent a semester studying Mandarin Chinese at Beijing University. I found that the Chinese people are wonderful, warm, and friendly, and they love America and Americans, and they yearn to be free. But they are not at all free. They are horribly oppressed by the brutal, murderous CCP regime. The students who I got to know at Beijing University were, to a person, scared silent. They feared reprisal from the regime if anyone were to overhear them speaking dissident views. You see, when the Chinese government believes that one of its citizens is stepping out of the line, voicing opposition to the regime, the government acts swiftly and mercilessly to stamp out the dissent. Sometimes, Chinese citizens are just disappeared by the government. On several occasions during my time in China, I saw military trucks pull up to one or another storefront or home. What looked like military police would jump out of the truck, enter the home or business, pull out a Chinese citizen, throw them in the truck, and drive off, as family members or colleagues stood on the roadside, bewildered, unable to act. According to the human rights group Safeguard Defenders, on average, at least 20 people a day are disappeared by authorities across China for even the most minor offenses against the regimes. The tens of thousands of Chinese citizens who have been disappeared over the years do not include the estimated 1.5 million Uyghurs who are presently imprisoned in a vast network of concentration camps in northwestern China. The CCP's genocide of the Uyghur population in the country is a grave, ongoing crime against humanity that America and the world should universally condemn. And yet the legacy media almost never mentions it. And far too many American corporations that, mind you, donate massive amounts of money to support Democrat candidates, benefit from Uyghur slave labor or otherwise operate in China and oppose all criticism of the brutal and murderous CCP regime. And anyone who doubts just how murderous and terrible the CCP regime truly is need only recall the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, a topic that the CCP has completely suppressed, scrubbed from the Chinese internet, and censored. Even mentioning the Tiananmen Square massacre in China can get you disappeared. The CCP crackdown on the night of June 3rd, 1989 was brutal. Centered in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, but occurring in many cities, the CCP's People's Liberation Army violently put down the pro-democracy protests that grew through the spring of 1989. They opened fire and brought in tanks, shooting or crushing those in the way. The CCP eventually admitted to 241 people killed, including police and soldiers, and around 7,000 people wounded. But the true death toll we know is estimated to be over 10,000. The CCP was then and is now the greatest threat to human freedom on the planet. And the CCP is growing more and more belligerent every single day, threatening the free people of Taiwan and directly challenging the United States. The CCP has been stealing our intellectual property, dumping subsidized and unfairly priced steel and other exports into the United States to undermine our manufacturing base, and laughing at us as far too many American corporations invest far too much money in China. Now, America defeated the evil communist Soviet regime by opposing the regime at every turn, refusing to trade with the country, and even refusing to trade with countries that did not embargo strategic goods with the Soviet Union. Eventually, we drove the Soviets to economic collapse and won the Cold War. But we have taken a very different approach with China, a very wrong-headed approach. Even though the CCP regime is every bit as evil as the Soviet regime was, indeed a strong case can be made that the CCP regime is even worse than the Soviets were, too many American politicians, mostly Democrats, have bought into the false idea that enriching China through investment will eventually cause the CCP to see the error of its ways and allow for political reform. Well, this, of course, has not happened. Total direct investment from the United States alone into China has increased every single year for many years, reaching nearly $120 billion per year in 2021. But the CCP has only become more oppressive, more brutal, and more belligerent. That makes me wonder, would we have been able to defeat the Soviet Union if our country was building up that country with hundreds of billions of dollars of direct investment year after year after year? I don't think so. If we want to maintain our freedom, maintain America as a beacon of freedom for the world, and prevent Americans from essentially becoming slaves to the CCP, we need to change our China policy immediately. Now, President Trump, he did many good things on that front, but much more work remains to be done. And that's why the new House Select Committee on China is so very important. The new Select Committee will be chaired by Representative Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, a solid conservative. The committee will be focused on escalating threats from the CCP and will investigate and submit policy recommendations on China's economic, technological, and security progress, in addition to its competition with the United States. Gallagher said that the committee will address a range of issues, including the Wuhan coronavirus, its origins at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, securing intellectual property, and bringing jobs back from China. So why on earth did 65 Democrats oppose the formation of this committee? Well, in short, the Democratic Party is now the anti-American party. The Democrats, you see, they don't mind authoritarian governments because that's the kind of government they want for America. For proof of that, one need look no further than the Biden administration's massive censorship operation exposed by Elon Musk's Twitter files, as well as emails uncovered in the Missouri versus Biden lawsuit. Now, I've discussed those topics at length in other episodes, and be sure to check out those prior episodes, but for purposes of today's show, it's sufficient to say that the Biden administration has engaged in unprecedented suppression of speech, violating Americans' First Amendment rights by coercing and colluding with social media companies and the legacy media to suppress viewpoints that the administration disfavors. It's almost like the Biden administration has been taking censorship lessons from the CCP. And that brings us to the most shocking and disturbing reason that might explain so many Democrats' seeming support for the CCP. It's all about Joe Biden and his son, Hunter. Everyone has heard about the classified documents that keep popping up in various places they shouldn't be. For example, in Joe Biden's garage next to his Corvette, and at the Penn Biden Center for Chinese Influence Operations and Payoffs at the University of Pennsylvania. Okay, that's not the real name of the Penn Biden Center, but it might as well be. Well, the potentially classified documents found in Biden's former office space and in his home probably came from Joe's time serving as vice president, before he left that office in 2017. According to the New York Post's Miranda Devine, a document discovered on Hunter Biden's laptop shows that Hunter was living in President Biden's Delaware home between March 2017 and February 2018. So, what was Hunter Biden doing during the time he was living at the president's residence, which was the same time frame when the documents were located at that residence? Well, Hunter was doing some lobbying work. He was doing lobbying work for the Chinese private equity firm Bohai Harvest RST. Now, Rex Lee, a cybersecurity expert, recently raised alarm about this in an interview with NTD. You see, in 2013, Rosemont Seneca Partners, Hunter Biden's investment firm, signed a deal with a subsidiary of a state-owned Chinese bank. That deal formed a joint venture investment fund, Bohai Harvest RST. In other words, Hunter's investment firm created a joint venture where one of the partners was owned and controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And Hunter held a 10% stake in that joint venture. So Hunter Biden was a joint venture partner with an entity owned and controlled by the CCP, and he was lobbying on behalf of that joint venture. And he was doing this during the same time frame when he was living at Joe Biden's Delaware home, and during the same time frame when those classified documents were showing up there. That sounds like a huge problem to me. Was Joe Biden passing along classified documents to Hunter? Were classified documents used by Hunter Biden in connection with his joint venture with a Chinese Communist Party-controlled bank subsidiary? Did the CCP gain access to classified documents through Hunter? These are troubling questions that must be answered. One also has to wonder, if Hunter Biden and Joe Biden have financial ties to the CCP, then what about other Democrat leaders? What about those 65 Democrats who voted against the China Committee? There is a lot of CCP dark money floating around Washington, D.C., after all. And then there's the University of Pennsylvania's Penn Biden Center in Washington, D.C., another place where classified documents have reportedly been discovered. Who had access to the Penn Biden Center office where Joe Biden apparently stored those documents? Did any CCP members ever visit the office? And what about funding for the Penn Biden Center? Penn awarded Joe Biden an honorary professorship at the university. Biden reportedly received $1 million for visiting the campus just 9 times between 2017 and 2019. At the same time, in 2017, the University of Pennsylvania reportedly received $16 million from anonymous Chinese donors, in addition to $14.5 million the next year, which is the year that the Penn Biden Center opened. One must wonder whether Hunter Biden helped arrange for those donations to the University of Pennsylvania, and whether there was any connection between those donations and Joe Biden being awarded an honorary professorship or the opening of the Penn Biden Center. All of these questions need to be answered. Hopefully, the new China Select Committee will diligently investigate all of these matters. The CCP is America's #1 enemy. And if the Bidens, the Democrats, or anyone in our government is compromised by the CCP, they must be exposed and dealt with according to the law. It is vital that our country stand strong against the CCP and maintain its position as a beacon of freedom for the world. And now, it's time for Behind the Headlines. All right, before we get to Behind the Headlines, if you like the content that we're providing on the show, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel and like the video. Drop a comment down in the comment section. Doing all those things helps our show, will multiply its impact, and really appreciate that. So, first up, California has suffered a terrible string of mass shootings over the last few days, one of which took place on 2 separate farms in Half Moon Bay. The suspect for the shooting has been taken into custody. And of course, we offer up our prayers to all those affected by this senseless and horrible crime, the terrible violence of these terrible crimes. Now, one travesty perpetrated by the radical left, however, is how they have politicized mass shootings. A policy discussion should take place, but the recent trend has left-wing reporters jumping on a soapbox moments after the news of a shooting breaks. Leftists also often mock Christians who offer prayers for the victims in immediate aftermath of a shooting and for their families, because according to the left, apparently, praying for comfort and healing for grieving people is way over the line. We can't have prayers? How terrible. Well, California has some of the most strict gun control laws in the entire nation. And many far-left gun control advocates come from California. Incidentally, whenever you hear a politician talk about guns in a way that shows their complete ignorance of firearms, well, those people, more often than not, are from California. Despite its strict gun control laws, gun violence continues to be a regular problem for the state of California. I thought gun control was going to get rid of gun violence. No, apparently it does not. California has a big problem with gun violence, as we tragically have seen in the last few days. It seems like criminals are not too worried about breaking gun laws or any other laws. Imagine that. Criminals who don't follow the law. Who could have imagined that could happen? Now, the left often accuses the right of supporting inaction when it comes to dealing with gun violence. But is that really true? Of course, it is not true. We on the right, first and foremost, recognize that evil exists in this world. And that's important because the left likes to create policy around a utopia that they've invented in their heads. Utopia that is impossible to realize because we live in a world where there is the reality of sin. So we on the right recognize that we must deal with reality, and that reality includes real evil people and real acts of evil. So one question that needs to be considered is pretty obvious when you're thinking about how to combat gun violence and other kinds of violence. How do we best protect good people from bad people? Now, we're getting real complicated here, but I think that's a threshold question that we should consider, right? Well, exercising our right to carry a firearm is a reasonable step to do just that, and it's a reasonable step that we should all take. There are plenty of great firearms instructors who can teach you how to defend yourself by carrying a firearm safely. And knowing how to protect yourself and your loved ones, if confronted by those who wish to do harm by bad people, it's a very important thing. Now, this requires time and effort from people, but it's a necessary sacrifice if we really want to stop the next mass shooter. If we really want to stop gun violence in our country, then we need to arm ourselves and deter gun violence in so doing. We should also put armed police officers in our schools. I know that's shocking, isn't it? It's something that suggestion always draws terrible ire from the left. They always complain that we don't want to turn our schools into prisons, and we don't want to turn our schools into war zones. No, we don't. But that's the problem. We don't want our schools to be war zones. We don't want gun violence in our schools. And to stop that, to deter that, to prevent that, we should put armed police officers who have weapons into the schools so that people that are going to do violence in schools know that they won't be able to get away with it. It's kind of common sense, right? The left's argument really doesn't make any sense. Plenty of government buildings are protected by armed officers, and we don't call those places war zones or prisons. We have armed officers there for a reason, to deter violence and to interrupt violence and to stop it and to save lives. It's almost like the leftists want to complain about guns to score political points, but they don't really care about the violence. Actually, it's not just that it seems like that. It actually is just that. I'll go a step further. I contend that the left wants violence and chaos so that they can get rid of the local police and replace them with a national police force. Now, I'm not saying that the left wants mass shootings and things like that, but in general, they are not too troubled by the violence that seems to be consuming our cities, like in Atlanta recently, or here in Minneapolis, in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area in 2020 and over that summer. The left didn't seem terribly concerned about it. They called all the arson and the violent protests and fires, those were just peaceful protests. So why is it that the left isn't concerned about violence and isn't too concerned about fighting violent criminals? Well, there's only one reasonable conclusion. They want it to continue. They see some benefit in it, and they don't want to disturb their other political narratives. And plus, their goal is ultimately to establish a national police force. If there's violence, they can say, hey, the local police aren't doing their job, let's get rid of them. We've demonized the local police anyway, and all sorts of other angles. They say the local police are racist and all sorts of terrible things that aren't true. They push forward a false narrative about racism and systemic racism in our justice system and in the police department. And then they point to the chaos that their denigration of the police results in, and then they're going to say, you know what, we just got to get rid of the local police. What should we have instead? Well, we should have a national police force, of course. Yeah, let's just have a national police force. And then we're one step closer to the Democrats and the left establishing their socialist dystopia, their socialist nightmare. That's the direction we do not want to go. And so that's really what's at issue here. Now, in a future show, I'm going to go into deeper policy discussions about the merits of other things, like stand your ground laws and the Castle Doctrine as well. But for now, just know it's important for all of us to take safety back into our own hands. Taking reasonable steps, we can drastically reduce the threat of mass shooters and stop them before they do harm. I hope Republicans continue to be stalwart supporters of the Second Amendment and fight back against the left's stupid talking points and horrific agenda. Second up today, former Indianapolis Colts head coach and current NFL football analyst Tony Dungy has come under fire from the radical left. So what is causing the left to lose its collective hive mind over the beloved Super Bowl winning coach? Well, Tony Dungy is a Christian. Well, that's really what it comes down to. You see, Tony Dungy began his crusade against the left's last bit of peace of mind by speaking at the March for Life rally. Oh my goodness, sound the alarm. A Christian thinks we shouldn't slaughter the unborn? And if that wasn't enough, he then refused to accept radical transgender ideology? Oh, well, that's the last straw. If you don't pledge your complete agreement with the leftist state religion, you see, you must be cut off from public life. We can't have religious people going around and spreading their horrible family-supporting, life-affirming rhetoric. Oh no, heaven forbid. Or wait, I guess we can't say heaven forbid. Mother Earth forbid, or something like that. Of course, the left's outrage is entirely performative. But performative outrage, well, that's the left's bread and butter. That's how they enact policy. The left has been waging war on reality for years now, and they've made a lot of headway, unfortunately. They've basically placed all their chips on the table, believing that the right wouldn't defend basic societal norms, and that the public would be largely apathetic. And for many years so far, they've largely been right about those things. Too many Americans let this insanity slip by because, in the moment, it is sometimes hard to argue against those who claim that they just want individual autonomy or that they just want to be left alone. And, hey, don't you think people should be able to make decisions for themselves about how to live their lives? And, of course, the left always mocks anyone who puts forward what they claim is a slippery slope argument. Well, we are 8 years out from the Obergefell decision. Those slippery slope arguments many of us were making, turns out the slope was even steeper and more slippery than we predicted. Because here we are, already at the point where we regularly hear leftists saying things like, you should lose your job if you don't affirm that men can be women and women can be men. Or, how dare you object to letting sexually confused men read stories to your children, you bigot? It's utter insanity. The fight for sanity and for reality and for the good is always worth it. If more conservatives would have mounted a good defense of sanity and reality back in 2015 and before, maybe we could have won this fight before it even really started. But now, our only choice is to press forward and fight on with courage and despite the tough odds. Times seem tough right now, but have no fear. We can and we will ultimately win. Why? Well, first of all, our opposition is mainly comprised of blue-haired people and men who paint their nails. So yeah, our odds aren't terribly bad, at least not in the long run. Also, we have good and we have reality on our side. And good and reality will win out if we continue to fight for them, if we don't give up. If we continue to fight, reality will prevail, God and the good will prevail. So, pray for Almighty God to deliver our nation from delusion and press on. Finally, today, we've got this from the Daily Wire. 4 illegal immigrants who were bused by Governor Greg Abbott from Texas to New York in the governor's busing program were arrested in New York for stealing $12,000 worth of merchandise from Macy's. Democrats in New York are outraged. How dare the migrants steal from New York instead of Texas? They should have been allowed into the country so they could commit crimes in Texas. So it's somehow Governor Abbott's fault for busing them to New York. The left really does seem to believe that illegal immigration is good for our country and that we should welcome illegal aliens with open arms, just so long as they don't show up in New York on their doorsteps, or even worse, on their doorsteps in Martha's Vineyard. The hypocrisy of saying one thing and doing another is all too common on the left. The misguided advocacy of the left is encouraging immigrants to flood over our wide-open borders. For years, the left has claimed that illegal aliens don't commit crimes. They come here and are more peaceful than citizens born in America, says the left. Well, leave aside for the moment the fact that anyone can conduct a study to tell them whatever they want to hear. But don't we already know of enough crime committed by illegal aliens to justify a complete shutdown of the border? And before we even need to talk about that, shouldn't the border be secure in any event, simply because it is a border of our sovereign country? It's too much common sense for the left. It is also telling that the Democrats who advocate for illegal immigration only want the illegal immigrants to be housed in conservative parts of the country. What's going on there? Well, the left really has no compassion for these people. They want votes, and they're willing to burden you to get them. If they were actually compassionate for the people in Mexico and Central America, they'd close the border, and they would start an anti-drug and anti-human trafficking operation. We should be partnering with the Mexican government to fight the cartels in a similar way to that President Trump proposed. But, as in all cases, the left's compassion for immigrants is fake. It is false compassion. Their real goal, as always, is one thing and one thing only. And that one thing is power. Now we're going to move to our deep dive segment. Classified documents. We've been hearing a lot about them lately. The FBI descended on Trump's Mar-a-Lago home unannounced in an actual raid, menacing black assault rifles and all. You would think he had actual nuclear missiles in his basement. By the way, the Department of Justice and the leftist media went absolutely haywire. But now, Biden is in on the action. He reportedly went ahead and stored classified documents from when he was vice president in his garage. Apparently, some of them may have just been left in a pile of boxes, just sitting out in the open, or maybe in a locked cabinet. Good move, Joe. Yes, the media is worked up about this, but not to the fever pitch it was with Trump. I mean, why didn't the FBI conduct an unannounced raid on Biden's home? Not only did they not raid his home, they even decided against sending FBI agents to just monitor Biden's own attorneys searching for classified documents at his home. The president's attorneys and the Department of Justice agreed instead to have Biden's lawyers conduct the searches for the classified documents. They say that's at least in part because Biden is cooperating with the Justice Department. Wait, what? Yeah, hey, people at the DOJ. Yeah, this is Biden's personal attorney. I'm going to go ahead and have our guys search for the classified docs, even though none of our guys have security clearances, and we work directly for the guy who is under suspicion. That cool? Does anyone honestly think that the Department of Justice would have accepted that kind of arrangement from Trump and his attorneys? Or how about from any other American citizen? No, we all know that would not fly, nor should it. Well, in the end, it didn't really work out perfectly for Joe either. A few days ago, on January 21st, CNN reported this. The FBI searches Biden's Wilmington home and finds more classified materials. But there is another little detail. The FBI search in this case was voluntary. So what happened in the house between the time that Biden's lawyers searched it and the time that they invited the FBI to come over and have a look around? We don't know. But we do know that on January 17th, ABC News reported, no evidence so far to support Biden's search, experts say. The font for this subheadline is larger than the rest of the story, and it's in bold. Nice try, ABC News. Something just doesn't add up here. Looks like they are digging their hole deeper and deeper. The walls are closing in. But this isn't the first time the Democrats have messed with classified documents. Back in 1968, the Vietnam War was at its height, and it was the most important issue in that year's presidential election. Eisenhower's vice president, Richard Nixon, was running against Democrat Hubert H. Humphrey, then the vice president of Lyndon Johnson. By April of 1968, only 40% of Americans thought that sending U.S. troops to fight in Vietnam wasn't a mistake, down from 61% in 1965. The war was the main reason that Johnson wasn't running again. But Johnson did want his party to win, and most Democrats at the time thought that momentum towards a peace in Vietnam would help Humphrey win. Thanks to a tip given to Walt Rostow, Johnson's national security advisor, Johnson knew that a woman named Anna Chennault, the head of Republican Women for Nixon, was in contact with the South Vietnamese government, supposedly working to keep the South fighting against communist aggression on orders from Nixon, which seems like a reasonable thing. So what did Johnson do? Well, he arranged for the FBI to monitor Americans who were in contact with the South Vietnamese government at their embassy in Washington, D.C. So that's surveilling American citizens in Washington, D.C. Within a day or so, on October 30th, the wiretaps revealed that the South Vietnamese ambassador told Chennault that something was cooking and to come talk about it later off the phone. But before that could happen, the FBI, one day before the election, reported to Johnson that Chennault had told the ambassador, "Hold on, we're going to win." The Johnson administration met on the issue and agreed to take no action. At least, no public action. Not long before Nixon moved into the White House, Walt Rostow, at Johnson's request, gathered up all the documentation relating to the embassy communications, Mrs. Chennault, Vietnam, and all of that. And Walt Rostow just took them. He took the documents. He just walked out the door with them on his person. Rostow later wrote that Johnson had asked him to personally hold on to the documents and to walk them out personally. How do we know all this? Well, after Lyndon Johnson died, Rostow put all the documents into sealed envelopes and gave them to the Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library in Texas. He left instructions not to open anything for 50 years, and if the time wasn't right, to wait another 50 years. Well, the library opened them in the 1990s. even though much of the information is classified to this day. It was all classified when Rostow spirited the documents away on Johnson's orders. It really seems that a person's duties with respect to handling classified documents depends on the person's political affiliation, doesn't it? And then we have Hillary Clinton. What she did makes the Trump and Biden issues almost seem trivial. As you might remember, back in 2014, the House Select Committee on Benghazi asked the State Department for all of Hillary Clinton's emails. One little problem. The State Department didn't have all of her emails because Hillary was storing them on a private server located inside her private home in Chappaqua, New York. Oops. Her lawyers combed through the servers and found about 30,000 work-related emails and turned them over to the State Department. In July of 2016, the FBI released a report that said that 113 of the emails contained classified information at the time they were sent. About 2,000 more were marked as classified after the fact by various government agencies. But in January 2016, many news outlets and some in the U.S. government, including Senator Marco Rubio, reported that 22 of the emails were determined by the U.S. intelligence community to be so damaging to national security that they could never be released, even in redacted form. In early August 2015, Hillary signed an affidavit swearing that she had turned over all copies of government records from her time in office. But later, in 2016, the FBI found several thousand work-related emails that she had failed to turn over. All of them had been deleted, presumably by Hillary. None of them should have ever been deleted. Clinton went on about how the emails were not marked classified at the time, even though many contained classified information. She had the server for convenience, she said. Her allies all over the media rushed to her defense and talked about how she didn't intentionally share classified intelligence. None of that should have mattered. Government regulations about keeping work emails on government servers exist for a reason. When she took office, the interpretation of the 1950 Federal Records Act was that government correspondence on personal email must be turned over to the appropriate agency. 10 months after she took office, a new regulation was enacted that allowed private email to be used, but it is still required that government correspondence be preserved in the appropriate agency record-keeping system. By deleting emails and storing them at home, Hillary did neither of those things. Many have noted how she put lives and national security at risk by going rogue and keeping her emails and classified information at home in an unsecure environment. And those people are correct. Of course, James Comey, the FBI director at the time, cleared Hillary just in time for the presidential election. We all know how that would have gone had she been from a different political party. Now let's go back into 1977, when President Jimmy Carter nominated Ted Sorensen, an advisor and speechwriter for President Kennedy, to be the CIA director. A certain Mr. Biden happened to be a senator from Delaware at the time. During the confirmation hearings, it came out that Mr. Sorensen admitted to taking boxes of classified records with him when he left the White House in 1964. He used them to write about his time with President Kennedy. The admission was part of an affidavit that was related to the Pentagon Papers. Well, Senator Biden, he would have none of this. He was outraged. He went as far as joining with the Republicans who were in the minority to block Sorensen's confirmation. As reported by Fox News, Biden said that the real issue was, quote, whether Mr. Sorensen intentionally took advantage of ambiguities in the law or carelessly ignored the law. Biden went on, if he did so, can he now bring the activities of the intelligence community within the strict limits of the law? Good question, Joe. He should ask himself something like that. He should also have asked Hillary. So what's the point of all this? Well, not long ago, we witnessed collective hysteria concerning President Trump and the documents he had at his Mar-a-Lago home. The left went nuts, even talking about and hoping for indictment. The first ever FBI raid of a president's home went down. For months, the media has been writing stories with headlines like the one in the New York Times that read, "Inside Mar-a-Lago, where thousands partied near secret files." Just do a Google search. You'll find these kinds of headlines everywhere. But then do a Google search for Biden classified documents. That level of alarm? It's not the same. The headlines are much more subdued, less sensational. The New York Times has one, 68 Days of Silence, Why the White House Stayed Mum on Classified Documents. It almost implies that they had a good reason. And this is the point. Even though there is a long history of questionable handling of classified materials, it's merely concerning when the Democrats do it. But then when conservatives do it, oh no, hold on, stop everything. Turn over every stone, find out what happened, then fire up the FBI and send the whole agency over to Trump's house. There are two sets of rules, one for the left and a different, more harsh set for the right. Imagine if Trump had done what Hillary did. There would have been no pass. The FBI would have gone after with everything at their disposal. They would have gone after him and they would not have stopped until they had gotten the result they wanted. Now, our republic is based on equal application of the law. The rule of law itself depends on the proposition that the law applies in the same way to the government as it does to everyone else, and that the law stands above politics. But the left wants to have one rule for the leftist elites and a different one for everyone else. You see, the left abhors equal application of the law. They can't have it because they want to be able to pick the winners and the losers. They want to set themselves up as our guardians in their socialist dystopia, where we little people exist to serve them. Well, it seems like more is coming out about the Biden classified document scandal every day. At least now the House Republicans will investigate, and that should result in a more equal application of the law. Oh, one more thing. Presidents have the power to declassify things. Secretaries of State and vice presidents, they do not. Well, that's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like the content that we are providing, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the video, drop a comment down in the comment section. Doing all of those things helps us grow the show, grow the audience, and multiply its impact. And please be sure to tune in next time for Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow.